And again, as long as we're talking about the media and whatnot, and like their limits of what they'll tolerate in terms of a liberal world order, the Wall Street Journal literally has endorsed Bolsonaro in Brazil.
Yep.
And even in the article endorsed him because he would basically do burn down the rainforest and do a genocide in the favelas.
Yes. And what was insane about that article is that the way that they are able to take this guy who is just an out fascist, a guy who genuinely wants to return to military dictatorship in Brazil, who basically is talking about a genocide against all the remaining indigenous people who live in the Amazon that are getting in the getting in the way of just turning it into giant fucking pastures for fucking McDonald's cattle, and also just a crackdown on everyone living informally in the cities. They turn that into, he's not very PC.
Yep.
He's willing to say stuff that some of those social justice warriors get annoyed by, and that really tells you the whole game is that at the thin end of the wedge, these guys try to make you think that all these political arguments are really just about language and about one side being a bunch of pussies and just can't handle the bants, essentially. But when you see how wide they're able to fucking define that, to take a guy who's explicitly said in the past, the only way to make Brazil work is to have a civil war that kills about 30,000 people, who's said, if I had a gay son, I would beat him up or whatever. Whose supporters are right now on a rampage attacking anyone that they see who's opposed to him, and then just turning that into just being un-PC. Sure, that'll work for the dipshit Americans who process all these debates on those levels of, and just by the way, rhetoric. But that's what they're actually talking about. This is all just these are the outriders for just a brutal fucking militarism that is going to be the response to inequality and climate change and everything.
And by the way, these are all the same people who spent last week talking about how deeply frightened they were of those women yelling at Jeff Flake in an elevator,
yes.
or just banging on the door of the Supreme Court. Like, that's what they think fascist. That's what they've convinced themselves. I mean, they're lying to them. I mean, they're obviously full of shit. They don't believe this shit.
No,
but they've gone whole hog into now portraying like this is what fascism looks like. Is sexual assault survivors yelling at Jeff Flake in an elevator, or yelling at Ted Cruz in a restaurant?
Well, I think it was a conscious 1-2 path, though. It's like I think there was a conscious connection of the synapse where it's all right, we need Trump isn't Bolsonaro. He doesn't have it together enough to be Bolsonaro, but I think he would do all the things that Bolsonaro is going to do when he probably wins. But it is amping themselves up. This is what we face. This is horrifying. Imagine if these people who didn't physically threaten us at all had guns. Okay,
yeah, we
need a strong man.
Yeah,
it's our only way.
Dude,
it's our only way. We made the right choice.
They're so afraid of Antifa, which is like, I don't know how many. Like, I would guess at most like there's a few hundred actual members of Antifa in America. I don't know. I'm sure people are going to yell at me for that. But like it's the boogeyman that they're psyching themselves up with to justify the reaction. Because here's the thing. We talked about last night about how tribalism is the new buzzword for every stupid person who wants to explain away the real political strife and differences in this country. The other thing that they're doing now is warning about mob rule.
Yeah.
They looked at the Kavanaugh protests and they saw mob rule. They saw all of the people, because like they're going to have to cover for the fact that they are incredibly unpopular, despite the fact that they control all of the government. And the more that dynamic goes on, the more people are honestly going to be upset and turn to things like protest as a way to express that dissatisfaction. So pay close attention to politicians and people in the media who are going to trying to scare themselves and goose themselves with this fantasy about how we're succumbing to mob rule. No, what we're succumbing to is that people are recognizing or running up against the fact that we live in a deeply undemocratic society.
Yes.
That our formal rituals and symbols and processes of our constitutional republic or democracy, in quotes, is totally undemocratic. We talked about last night, the senators who voted yes on Kavanaugh represent less than a third of the population of this country. Even though the Republicans held control, they expanded their seats in the House of Representatives the last election, Democrats received more votes by a huge number
Yep.
than the Republicans.
And you
did.
know who also
the
received?
president
Yes.
lost by 3 million votes.
He lost. It's like, and the thing is that they're like, yeah, get over it. What? But when Barack Obama won a fucking landslide in 2008, within a month, people were marching around in front of Panera Bread with fucking AR-15s, talking about how they were being fucking, they were going to resist dictatorship. Meanwhile, they expect everyone else to watch a regime that is not legitimate by any of the ways that we have come to understand political legitimacy. We are all taught like idiots that everyone votes and the person with the largest number of votes is the one. It's like, no, a president who wasn't elected popularly, a fucking Congress that wasn't elected popularly, an entire chamber of the Senate which is wildly malapportioned, and then they get to put people on a Supreme Court with the votes of people representing a third of the country for life,
Less than a third of the country.
for life. And those people will have the ability to strike down any, if there ever is a return to popular fucking sovereignty in this country. And at this point, it doesn't look like it, because everyone expecting that blue wave in November is going to have to realize that they are actively trying to steal the fucking election in the midterms with massive fucking voter registration crackdowns and suppression. In Georgia and Indiana, they're doing it everywhere they have any kind of formal control over the process.
And guess what?
Elections.
It's all legal and democratic.
Yep.
It's all
They're
constitutional.
filling out all the forms. They're crossing the T's. And that's all that matters in this country. That's what's so terrifying, is that as long as the forms are observed, that's how like rigidly we have become sort of shaped by these. And it's not the norms. The norms are out the window, obviously. But the formal mechanisms of power, as long as the formal mechanisms are observed, there's no trigger to stop things like that from happening. From the Georgia Secretary of State, who is running as a Republican for governor and is also in charge of the fucking electoral process, deciding we're going to apply a standard to voter registrations that means that if you left a hyphen out of your name compared to its record, or you put street instead of avenue, we can cancel your voter registration and then not tell you. So you show up on election day and can't vote.
I mean, we talked about this on stage last night, but I think it bears repeating now. What's going on in Georgia? I mean, look this up, because it is the test case, or what they're going to continue to do with the more and more, the more control over like the legal forms through the Supreme Court or federal judgeships or just state level Secretary of States, how they're going to treat voting. Yeah. In just 2017 alone, the guy who's currently running for governor against a popular contender that's in a close race has kicked something like, in 1 year alone, 70,000 people off the voter rolls. And wouldn't you know it, 70% of them are African American in a state, Georgia, with one of the highest percentages of African Americans in the country. I think it's almost like, it's like 30 to 40%.
Yeah, it's like 32%, but that's way less than the 70% of the suspended registrations or whatever they are.
And again, back to this idea about mob rule. It's like the other stock phrase you hear all the time from stupid people who want to sound smart or just justify their own venality and evil is, this is a republic, not a democracy.
Yes.
That's one of the high key, like, dumb guy trying to sound smart shit that you'll ever hear. And I saw a thing another day, this guy, Patrick Ruffini, who's this like insect looking GOP consultant, said, liberals and Democrats just need to understand America's just a conservative country. We just are conservative. Our Constitution is conservative.
Well,
and you got to that's true. But you got to, again, pay attention to the conflation between the conservative nature of our government and Constitution and the conservative nature of our population.
Yep.
And I got to say, I'll give him credit. Iglesias pointed this out and other people did too. Whereas if he's so confident in the idea that America is just so inherently conservative in our culture and our population, why do they have to rely on things like the Senate, the Electoral College, gerrymandering, voter suppression, voter ID laws? If he's so confident that America is just such an inherently conservative country, you should be able to vote from home on the internet.
Yes.
Being automatically registered, and the election day would be like a national holiday.
There's so many things we could do if there was a bipartisan belief that voting was a thing people should do. But that's not the case. The Republicans are fully on board with the idea that voting should be difficult. And they might give you some horseshit about how it proves that you really care about your vote and that you have civic virtue or whatever. But that's just jack me off bullshit. What they really mean is more people vote, the more fucked we are. And we're not going to let that happen.
Because they know forget on like calling yourself liberal or conservative. On an issue by issue basis, they are wildly unpopular.
It's insane. How
And then guess
unpopular
what? The
they are.
Democrats are too.
Absolutely.
Look at polling on any kind of broadly left-wing policy agenda, and you'll find that half of Trump supporters are in favor of it.
Yeah.
The reason they're against it is probably because they just think like liberals or Democrats like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say more about that, but just like look at what's going on in Georgia and Indiana right now, because it's coming soon to a state near you. And again, we've talked in the past about how fucked up the voting is in the New York state, and that's entirely the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
As well. So I mean, like, just because they're in charge doesn't mean it's much better.
No.
I mean, I guess they're just trying to make it harder for like anyone to run in a primary against a Democrat, basically. But what's going on in Georgia and Indiana is just
Well, it should be noted that this isn't new.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, one of the biggest stories from the 2000 election was Kathleen Harris purging the voter rolls in advance of the election. And this is something that Republicans have been doing, and many Democrats as well, for decades now. I mean, maybe they're bolder about it, and maybe they're like more people are just paying attention, more people are angry about it now. And ultimately, these are voter suppression techniques from the Jim Crow era. They're just now have been metastasized throughout the country.
And now that they've got Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, I guess the Roberts Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and I think we're going to find what they're going to do now with their new Supreme Court majority is they're going to find that it's perfectly legal and constitutional to go back to all the old fun ways of
poll taxes. Cool, go for it. Literacy tests, go nuts, have fun. They're going to do the whole thing. Property requirements, which, by the way, I found this out. Our friend Everett, Agent Napoleon, who lives in Texas and is having a very difficult time registering to vote, because in Texas it is far easier to get a firearm than it is to register to vote, because he doesn't have a photo ID. And he's in a situation where he's going to have to like swear before a fucking judge or something that he's like actually lives there in order to even have a chance.
He's going to have to do the voter's oath.
Yes, in order to cast a provisional vote. But what he could do he doesn't have a license, but what he could do, he could get a concealed carry firearms license. That would let him vote. The other thing he could do, show evidence that he owns his home or has been employed for 5 straight years. So that's essentially that's like a property requirement that I think if you make it impossible for people to get other means of identifying themselves, that's going to have to be what people get instead.
And the only way you could roll back any of this, because for a couple decades now, there's just been like a slow chipping away, then sudden stripping of a lot of VRA things in the VRA that were supposed to prevent things like this from happening. But the VRA at this point may as well not have been passed.
Yep.
And the federal courts are still they still lean a little more liberal than they do conservative, but I don't think they will by the
Not
end
for
of
much
Trump's
longer.
First term. They
I
will
think
not.
Chuck Schumer just did a deal where he let everyone go home to campaign, and in return they got 15 new federal judges who I'm sure are all blood drinking psychopaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good job,
Wow,
Chuck.
Senate Minority Leader deals over here.
Yeah.
Literally.
Watch out, Donald.
Literally, he just gave up the courts for a bathroom break. I mean, the only way, if there is another Democratic president and they have any type of legislative majority, literally the only way they could hold on to that is if they just reamed out the entire court system. Which you can do, but I don't think they have the will to do that.
No, they would need to pick a fucking power washer and just blow all these psychopaths and like amateur magicians and fucking Bigfoot researchers that they fucking threw on the court and Herbalife salesmen. They just have to purge all of them.
It's not just the VRA. I mean, even if they held on to their electoral gains, unlike last time, even if they did that, they could not even pass anything below, an earned income tax credit for anyone unless they clear this out. Unless they really take a long, hard effort to power wash this shit.
Yeah. But honestly, I don't know. I just don't know if they're ever going to take power again. And the thing is you can make an accelerationist case there that, for the anti-electoral left, who I think they have some persuasive critiques about the way that electoral campaigns tend to sort of channel and diffuse energy. But I think for the longest time, the real meaningful rejoinder to that I was always persuaded by is it's really the only game in town in America, because people do have an innate sense that their institutions are legitimate, even if they're not. And they process politics through elections. They see that as where the what that domain entails. And, they're just not ready to imagine politics outside of the constraints of elections. But I got to tell you, at this point, if they're just going to say, okay, we're not giving back power, and we're going to do everything we can to essentially make elections just ornamental, then that could be conducive to people realizing that, as we said in a few episodes, we've said before on the show, like, we might have to start talking about shit like being illegal, about doing crimes, essentially, as a form of making politics mean more than voting or organizing campaigns.
Well, that would be the tipping point, wouldn't it?
I mean, and again, we've talked about it before on the show. I mean, like, all of this, of course, is indicative that the people who have power know how unpopular they are. They know how unpopular the things they actually want to do and are doing are. They've gotten away with it for a long time because, most people just are happy to go along to get along, or just they want things to be normal, and they just basically want to be, I don't know, just like untroubled, and just like sort of go about their days. But, the more they do this, and again, like, this is all taking place under the backdrop of accelerating climate change and the pressure on, resources and the massive upward transfer of wealth, that, like, this is really their project, is to, again, maintain, I guess, a kind of formal facade of democracy, which they'd prefer because it's easier to do that. But it is essentially one that manages the upward transfer of wealth and resources to them, and also protects them from any challenge to that, electorally, democratically, or otherwise, which is why they're investing so heavily in things like, safe rooms, guns, private security forces, walled off, compounds and
there was an article in the New York Post about how the big hip trend in the Hamptons is spending millions of dollars on safe rooms and guns and stuff. And like, the hook of it, the comedy hook, is that it's all these people who are paranoid about MS-13.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at the front of their minds they are, because they all love Trump, and that's what Trump talks about. And everyone has a vivid imagination about, some horrible gangbanger showing up at your house because they've seen it on TV. But that's not who that's really for. That's not at the deep level. That's not why they're building $1 million fucking bunkers. It's for everyone else. Because that's what this is, the end stage of hyper capitalist accumulation, where it's like you got to grab all the chips off the table while you can, and so that you have the money to create basically a private infrastructure of survival when the actual public sphere is no longer viable anymore. When public infrastructure and public services no longer exist.
And, when people no longer can just, like, go along to get along.
Yes.
Or just sort of pretend everything is okay, or just, like, want to be left alone or whatever.
Yep.
Well, that will become functionally impossible.
Yep. It really
So,
is. It's late Roman Empire shit.
So, pay attention, like I said, to how often, the Kavanaugh thing was like a good dress rehearsal for this. But pay attention to all of the politicians and media people who are now talking about mob rule, and how terrifying and scary that is for our wonderful constitutional republic. The idea that, large numbers of people would, attempt to, take to the streets to attempt to, express their anger, their legitimate anger and rage at the people who rule them undemocratically.
Yep.
That's mob rule to these people. That's fascism to them, as they, again, literally endorse Bolsonaro in Brazil, and, I don't know, or the Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Yeah.
So, pay close attention to these people, because they're telling you what they really believe.
Yep.